James HAYS, Post-Baccalaureate Certificate Candidate. Better than carrots or sticks. The book is divided into 6 chapters, each addressing different aspects of restorative practices. The first chapter focuses on whether to adopt a punitive or restorative approach to discipline. The second chapter discusses the importance of relationships and meaningful instruction in working with children, each addressing different aspects of restorative practices. The third chapter examines classroom procedures and expectations that support restorative practices, while the fourth chapter delves into using informal restorative practices every day, mainly through the use of language. The fifth chapter explores formal restorative practices, including structured conversations, classroom circles, victim-offender dialogues, and high-stakes conferences. The final chapter challenges educators to adopt a restorative mindset and engage in preventative measures to avoid crises. The first chapter is titled, Punitive or Restorative? The choice is yours. Current practices on rules and rewards is discussed. Discipline procedures, school culture. How do you deal with shame and humiliation? Is it good practice to suspend and expel students? Now, I will leave that to my administrators. More on this later. I got some comments. The second chapter is titled, Relationships and Meaningful Instruction, the Foundations of Restorative Practices. Social and emotional competencies that schools need to include in their programs or curriculum. Strategies on how to develop these competencies. Introduces practices that strengthen student-teacher and student-student relationships. The third chapter is entitled Classroom Procedures and Expectations, Structures that Support Restorative Practices. Do you know the differences between rules, procedures, and expectations? How do you communicate expectations and goals inside the classroom? How do you respond to unwanted behavior? This chapter outlines how to align rules, procedures, and expectations correctly. The fourth chapter is titled Peace Building. I like the phrase. Using informal restorative practices every day. Daily informational practices that we engage in, and it specifically focuses on how we use language. This came in handy for me. The book cites the work of Peter Johnston, author of the book Choice Words. The writer challenges us teachers to think about the impact of words on our students' social and emotional development. Do we use language effectively to help in identity building among our students? Do our words promote agency and independence, or does it have the opposite effect? Can our students engage in difficult conversations with their peers? The fifth chapter is titled Peacemaking, Strategic Implementation of Formal Restorative Practices. Examines formal practices we can include in our programs and curriculum. Structured conversations are introduced along with formal classroom circles, victim-offender dialogues, and high-stakes conferences. The book provides sample conversation starters, questions, and forms that teachers can readily use. The sixth chapter is titled Creating the Mindset for Restorative Practices. It invites all educators to develop a mindset for restorative practices. This way, the approach is preventative. We don't wait for a crisis to arrive or for a teacher-team meeting where admin, by order of the higher-ups at Gwinnett County Public Schools, introduce restorative practices. Rather, we have the means to prevent the crisis from happening now. Ultimately, we shouldn't leave our students' social and emotional development to chance. We should provide explicit instruction, systematic instruction, and intentional instruction to help them grow into good citizens. Gwinnett County Public Schools, we need to rethink how we discipline. We need to show respect, build identities, and create a community of love and support. With such a community, we can make a difference in the lives of our students. For the immediate future, however, I'm not going to hold my breath. Upper echelons of Gwinnett County Public Schools first. Admin first. They've got to adopt this first. Then individual classrooms, and I mean all individual classrooms, should implement this strategy. It won't work if we do it one at a time. It just won't. In the initial chapter of Better Carrots Than Sticks, the authors compare traditional disciplinary and restorative approaches. The entire book debates 2 methods of discipline. The restorative approach, people and relationships are violated. Justice identifies needs and obligations. Accountability is defined as understanding the effects of the offense and repairing any harm. The traditional approach, accountability is synonymous with punishment. School rules frequently need to be fixed. Justice primarily targets the offender, often neglecting the victim. The book asserts that accountability involves understanding the impact of the offense and actively working to repair the harm. All involved parties, offender, victim, school community, play direct roles in the resolution process. I see this as far off in Gwinnett County, but I don't know, maybe we can make a difference now. The book asserts that accountability involves understanding the impact of the offense, actively working to repair the harm, emphasizes the importance of relationships, respecting individuals. The authors also shed light on the drawbacks, rewards, and punishments associated with conventional disciplinary approaches. They argue that these methods do not effectively educate students, but rather promote short-term compliance, potentially undermining motivation. Student suspensions and expulsions can hinder efforts to improve attendance. The idea of installing a restorative approach in the classroom should be delayed. To begin to install a restorative strategy, the county needs to reevaluate the way we run our schools. For now, strict rules and consequences are the only way, I feel. That's the only way to keep order so learning can take place. And I'm speaking, of course, of my school in particular. At the county level, the restorative process and how it works with student retention, disruption, offensive behavior, absenteeism, disciplinary cases, needs to be explained. We need to invest in a school's physical environment, culture, and people, beginning with efforts at the highest levels of admin. Administration has got to be on board. The highest levels of administration first. Individual efforts at restorative discipline would ultimately fail. If I did it and my next door neighbor down the hall did not do it, it's not going to work. Some view it strictly as a set of rules, routines, and procedures. The book defines an effective learning environment as having two aspects: relationships, specifically the range of interpersonal skills necessary to maintain healthy relationships, and high-quality instruction. We need an effective classroom management system that we can rely on during stress and conflict. Now, the restorative discipline method is not a workable solution in individual classroom environments. Individual, I stress again, one-offs will not work. If used in an overcrowded classroom, any hiccups that involve 10 minutes to restore order run the risk of losing the class for an additional 10 minutes. The authors of this book, Smith, Fisher, and Frey, challenge us to rethink discipline. The traditional approach focuses on rule violations, establishing justice through guilt and punishments that define accountability. Now, I do see hints, some elements in this book that we, of course, the solution-seeking teaching public, can borrow. We can borrow what is written and install the practices not in an isolated classroom. Instead, we can push to have a systemic rollout, of course, push with admin, starting in the highest echelons of Gwinnett County public schools. We must install some or all of these ideas at the higher school system levels first, administration, then implement the ideas in lower elementary schools and follow the students as they progress in grade levels. So starting now, 12 years from now, it will be fully implemented. As a teacher at a high school where violence is all too frequent, I must consider the formal empirical studies and counter-arguments of those who believe in a traditional approach to discipline. I am sure that they will argue that restorative practices take too much time, take too much effort. I think there's got to be a compromise somewhere, though. There's got to be a compromise. I have access to Galileo. I can do some research and a penchant for reading an excellent empirical research paper. So I'll get there. There's got to be a way to meld the traditional with the restorative for the time being. Last year, my principal declared, "The students won." But this year, with a former Detroit police officer as our principal, we are run like a well-oiled detention center. I hate to use that term, but that's the only one that fits, with a large learning component, and it seems to be working. Nonetheless, I acknowledge the need to explore counter approaches on the empirical research level. I will look into this. It's an excellent idea. It's got to be installed, however, with some care.